nicknames, I must have made it. So I appreciate it. But no, it's great to be with everybody today. So many of you know the Appalachian Mountain Club. Many of you in the room have been a part of what the Appalachian Mountain Club's been up to here in Maine for a long time. And so it's a big year for AMC for a number of reasons that we'll get into. So it felt like the right time to give this talk and talk about what we've been up to and what we hope to achieve moving forward. So the AMC, as of January 4th of this year, celebrated its 150th birthday.
Wow.
So we are the oldest conservation organization in the United States. We've been around since 1876. And we are a little bit unusual when it comes to conservation organizations because we're not primarily a land organization. We're actually not a land trust. And we're not really all about sort of outdoor summer camp experiences. We're in the intersection of both, kind of in the middle. We're about people in the outdoors and creating opportunities for that up and down the full Appalachian region. And almost since our earliest founding, there's been this a continuous theory of change that's really driven a lot of our work. And it's something that actually people of Scottsdale County live every day. We know this is instinctive to who we are, which is if you get outdoors or you work outdoors and you spend time outdoors, you start to love those places. And then when you start to love those places, you begin to protect them. This isn't as obvious in other parts of the country, but it's something that we're fortunate to have here in Scottsdale County for sure. So a little bit about AMC. I mentioned we're 150 years old. I think there's a bunch of organizations out there that have stories about them being founded on a napkin. We actually have our napkin in our archives. So you can go down and see it. But we were founded by 5 gentlemen from MIT who had this idea that if you got people outside and led expeditions, that perhaps there would be an opportunity to conserve some of these places. And keep in mind, this is 1876. This is a radical idea. Nobody was thinking about these sorts of things. Land protection wasn't even a phrase on people's lips. So to have folks thinking that we should protect some of these places and make sure that they're available for the future was truly radical. So fast forward to today, we've got about 93,000 members. We work from Maine to Virginia. And these are some of the large landscapes that we've been involved with over that time, whether it's been in the creation of the wilderness areas in the Adirondack parks. Probably we're best known for our work in White Mountain National Forest, which we'll get into. But the AMC's been directly involved in over 12 million acres of conservation in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the Pennsylvania Highlands. A huge amount of conservation in southern New England, in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And then, of course, one of our crown jewel really is the work here in Scottsdale County for the Maine Woods Initiative that we'll talk about in a bit. And I should say, too, we are, again, if you think of those two Venn diagrams, there's the people side and there's the outdoor side. So my work at AMC is on the outdoor side. So I have the good fortune to oversee all of our conservation work across this full region. So I have our trails department, our research department, our policy department, and our lands team. And so aside from our land here in the state of Maine, we own land in 5 other states. And I have a policy team that works in individual states from Virginia to Maine with a federal policy team that works over them. And then our research department, we actually have the oldest continually operating nonprofit research department in the United States. It was founded in 1930, and it's been doing ecological research in high elevation areas in the Whites and actually up and down the northeastern forests for that time. So we have some of the oldest, what we now know of as climate data sets that we've been continuing to add to since 1930. So again, at our founding, there was this kind of unusual, radical idea of could you take, at the time, which already was largely public land. If you think of the history of the United States, most of the land belonged to the federal government east of the Mississippi River. A fair amount of our own state belonged to the public, right? In the state of Maine, at our inception in 1820, a huge percentage of it belonged to the state of Massachusetts. And we've spent the better part of a lifetime selling that off. And that was the way to drive development and to drive settlement, was to take what was considered to be kind of public baggage and convert it into private use. By the latter half of the 19th century, that felt like maybe not such a great idea all the time everywhere. Maybe we should save some things for the public, and maybe we should have some opportunities to ensure that the public had broader access to these big places. And so there was this renewed interest in the 1870s that AMC really tapped into, and it really focused their energies in the White Mountains. And so out of whole cloth, we created this system of how to think about landscape scale conservation before there was this idea of even that could be something that one could do. Another key important thing to remember is the federal government was constitutionally barred from acquiring land east of the Mississippi River up until the passage of the Weeks Act, which we'll get to in a minute, in 1911. So the federal government could not acquire new lands and had sold most of its lands east of the Mississippi. AMC became a landowner in the White Mountains in 1880. That was that we got our first acre from the brown paper on the side of Madison Mountain, and we built a hut on it the following year. And we've been running high elevation huts ever since then in the Whites to act as a way to protect people in the high elevation areas, and actually to protect those high elevation areas from dispersed use. Those were very, very rare and sensitive places even then, and so to channel that use was really important to us. And we've had a number of firsts throughout our existence. We founded the first trail crew in 1919, the first public trail crew, or professional trail crew that we still run today. And again, I mentioned the research connection. But this by far was the single biggest achievement that the organization can hang its hat on up until that time, from 1876 to 1911, which required amending the U.S. Constitution to passed the Weeks Act in 1911, which finally gave the federal government the ability to acquire land for conservation and for economic opportunity east of the Mississippi. So 50 years of work went into building the coalition that made that possible. There was a Massachusetts senator, Henry Cabot Lodge, who actually got the bill over the finish line, which had a lot to do with a lot of pushing from some very well-connected folks at AMC. What that enabled is, in 1918, the creation of the White Mountain National Forest, which today stands at 800,000 acres. And AMC was influential in mapping that forest as it was being purchased to guide acquisition efforts. And that 800,000 acre national forest that splits between Maine and New Hampshire took 4,000 individual purchases to piece together. And the bulk of those purchases happened in the first 15 years. So it was a flurry of activity, with AMC cartographers actually aiding the federal government in doing a lot of that work. And that's been a landscape where we've spent a tremendous amount of time over the last century. So this will be a map that's not unfamiliar to many of you in this room, but what you're seeing, mostly what you're seeing highlighted on this map of Maine is the majority of our unorganized territories, which I don't think we as Mainers realize how completely bizarre this really is compared to everywhere else in the lower 48. We have about 10.4 million acres of our state that are organized into one giant municipality, in effect. No one else has this, anything like this. And there's a long and fascinating history as to why we have it, and it's given us many opportunities that we all benefit from even today. But what you're seeing is, particularly in this period between 1994 and 2005, a tremendous shift and a tremendous instability in the background was happening right up against all of our communities that I'm sure many of you lived through, as I certainly did. On the left, in red, those were the traditional vertically integrated pulp and paper companies. Folks like Great Northern Paper Company, Scott Paper Company, International Paper Company. These folks owned both land and mills. By 1994, they were on shaky footing. So what happened by 2005? All of them, virtually all of them, with the exception of Irving to the north, sold their land and sold it off relatively quickly. And a lot of that land went off into investment vehicles. So what you see in blue are either REITs, real estate investment trusts, or TIMOs, timber investment management organizations. And those two investment vehicles had much shorter time horizons that they were interested in managing than their paper industrial predecessors, who really wanted to own that land as a way to provide fiber to mills and heavy capital infrastructure that they had locked up in their mills. And so that was a major shift. And I don't have to tell many of you, but just using Willimantic as an example, in that time period from about 1994 till up about 2008, Willimantic, where I'm from, where many of you know, was sold 4 times. Many times people didn't even know that the sale had happened. But certainly there was a lot of uncertainty in this time period. And so it was in the background of all of this. Maine was the poster child for this sort of turnover in the industrial timberland space, and it raised a lot of questions. We've all benefited from public access for well over 150, 200 years here in Maine. It's been a cornerstone of our tradition to land use here, that the public has the ability to responsibly and in a non-damaging way utilize private land. That's not a guarantee, right? That's a social contract. And so this was happening up and down the Northeast. So AMC was heavily involved at the time in federal legislation in 1990 to actually quantify the change so that folks could understand the amount of land that was changing hands and wrap their heads around, are there conversations that we should be having to make sure that the economy and the public can continue to benefit in the way that they had from these landscapes. And so out of those bigger conversations, AMC concocted this idea that maybe we could be a large landowner and put into practice some of the things that we learned about in the White Mountain National Forest through the U.S. Forest Service. So this idea of wanting to do something big at landscape scale, being the actual landowners ourselves, practicing responsible forestry, making sure that we participated in the local economy, led us to develop kind of a brand new model that still is somewhat fairly unique, where I work for a 501c3, the Appalachian Mountain Club, which is a nonprofit, but I'm the business manager of an LLC, which is the land. And so that was literally a direct ask from folks in our communities right here who said, if you folks are going to come in and buy a bunch of land, it needs to participate in the local economy in a very predictable, straightforward, reliable way. As we all know, our county, Scottsbluff County, is the size of the state of Connecticut, Rhode Island, and a good chunk of western Massachusetts in land size. We're the second largest county east of the Mississippi River. We only have 17,000 people here. So if you took a large amount of land off the tax rolls, every one of us would feel that in our pockets. So AMC created this LLC and specifically did not create a land trust to be able to accommodate those requests. And the property remains on the tax rolls and we pay all taxes just like a normal business. But the business, our business, is formed around conservation. And that gives us a greater amount of flexibility to think about different financing tools to be able to buy the land in the first place and make ongoing investments in the landscape. So, but we weren't really certain at the time in 2001, when we started to cook this idea, where we were going to do it, where we were going to find this land. We knew there was a lot changing hands, so where was a good place to look? So we're going to zoom way out, not because AMC decided they were going to look across the globe, we certainly weren't, but how many folks have ever heard of the temperate deciduous mixed forest biome? I've got a couple of you, all right. Well, you're not alone if you've never heard about it. It's pretty sad, and I count myself in that category too, because this is the biome that the vast majority of folks in both Eastern and Western societies live in. As you can see, the whole eastern half of the United States, all of Western Europe into the central steppes, crops up again in China, Korea, and Japan, and then there's a little sliver of it along the southern hemisphere. It's an incredibly rich and diverse forest biome. It's a mix of hardwood trees and softwood trees. It's a very temperate climate, which means it's very conducive to human habitation. And it's an ecologically diverse biome that's provided a tremendous amount of richness to both of the Western and Eastern societies. The reason that we don't know much about it, in general speaking, is this is what's left. The areas in yellow are what's left of this biome in terms of intact segments of this biome that maintain their full ecological functionality. We have, in the state of Maine, right now, the single largest patch anywhere in the world of this biome that's able to function fully as a forest, that's never been converted to agriculture, that's remained a forest. Doesn't mean that we haven't cut trees or managed it. We absolutely have. But we've done it in such a way that maintains the ecological functionality of the place. Maine's forests are truly, globally irreplaceable. They are by far one of our greatest assets, and for many of us, we just don't even have a way to conceive of the true value that they have. You look at it a different way. This is a map of the night sky in the Northeast. You know, here we are in northern Maine, right? Who left the lights on in Holton? I don't know. Here we are. So you can view this map in two different ways, right? You can view this map as we have this tremendous gift, this tremendous ability to be able to walk outside our houses at night, any one of us, and look up and see stars. You can't do that in other parts of the country. We get people that come to our lodges who've never seen stars in their lives. And they come here and they're dumbfounded. The other way to view this map is this truly is a socioeconomic map. These are the places that have enough concentrated wealth to leave the lights on. So if you look at it from an economic lens, this is the market base that this forest, this 10.4 million acre forest supplies. And it supplies 75 million people that live in the Northeast. We have 75 million people between the Maritimes, Canada and major cities like Boston, New York, all the way down to Philadelphia that rely on this forest. So it's critically important to view it through both lenses. When you look at the footprint of human development, it really stands out. So you can see that encroachment of development from the southern part of the state, all that big block of red, and just how our region, the 100-mile wilderness region, really is at this critical juncture where it's the start of the big woods to the north, but we're right on the line of development to the south. And so it's this critical place that really felt right from AMC's perspective, where we could think about hopefully setting up a model that could work in a place like this. And what drew us to this area was we're about people. So we want people to be able to go to these places. We want people to be able to work in these places. And so we didn't want to be too far in the interior because then it wouldn't mean anything to local folks. Local folks would have a harder time accessing it. So being on the edge felt like the right place. So we all know this, but usually when I go in other parts of the country and talk about the work here in Maine, they have no idea what we talk about when we mean the 100-mile wilderness region. But it's that stretch, as we all know, from Monson all the way through the top of Mount Katahdin. And our big service communities. I'm ashamed to say that my own hometown didn't make the list of the map, but we're there. It's all good. You all know that. Another thing that I think is incredibly important to keep in mind about this landscape is if you think about the geologic timeline of the history of the Maine woods, it's a glaciated landscape, right? 12,000 years ago, we had 2.5 miles of ice that covered this place and carved it flat and went up and over those mountains. Those mountains were twice the size they were before the glaciers, or twice as small as they would have been before the glaciers. But right on the heels of those glaciers, we had the Wabanaki people, who were with us still, right? The 4 tribes of Maine. They were right on the heels of those glaciers. They inhabited this place for some 4,000 years when it was a tundra, when there was no forest. It took 4,000 years for soil to accumulate to a depth enough and richness enough to be able to grow trees. So what that means in human history is that the Wabanaki people literally had a forest grow up around them, which means there's never been a time in the history of this forest that there haven't been people in this forest, which as Western Europeans is hard for us because we have this concept of wilderness that takes people out of the forest, that forests can't be wild unless they don't have people in them. And I think that both the lived experiences of the Wabanaki people and our own communities, in places like Monson and Willimantic, we recognize that these forests wouldn't be the way that they are were it not that they didn't have people in them. So people are a critically important part of the success of these forests. So what have we been up to? We've been out running around doing lots of things, but in 2003, AMC took the biggest risk they'd ever taken. To that time, we'd only owned about 2,000 acres scattered across 5 states, and then in 2003, my predecessor, Walter Graff, who was the vice president at the time, made a phone call to International Paper and said, gee, we hear you're going to market 37,000 acres in Bowdoin College East and West Grant T7R9. We'd like a chance at putting in a bid on that, and the phone went click. So Walter's like, okay, I guess that's not going to work. So it actually took a phone call from the governor of Maine to International Paper to say they're serious. If you give them a shot, they actually do want to buy that land. And that actually opened the door and enabled AMC to make a successful bid to buy the Katahdin Ironworks tract, this 37,000 acre piece here. We actually bought Little Lyford about a month before, 200 acres around Little Lyford, and then the remaining 37,000 acres. In 2009, we bought 27,000 acres from Plum Creek. This was former Scott Paper Company land. I joined in 2012, and then in 2015, we bought Baker Mountain in 2 parts from 15 common undivided owners, which is a fairly unique ownership structure that you really only find here in Maine, but that took a long time to piece that together. 2016, we actually were given Silver Lake, which is about 4,000 acres and a strip of river, the West Branch of the Pleasant River. 2022, we acquired the Pleasant River Headwaters Forest, which was 27,000 acres in size from a TIMO, a Timber Investment Management Company. That was actually owned by the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund. They owned that piece of property, but a long time ago it was Huber family land. And then in 2025, in September of last year, we closed on and finally acquired the Barnard Forest, which had a long history. That was most recently owned by Roxanne Quimby. We've got another one on the works, which you'll see later in the presentation. We currently are managing, though we don't own it, 29,000 acres right here Formerly owned by the Carrier family. Before that it was Hancock Investments. That's what we're calling the Whitecap Highlands Forest. So to date, we own 127,000 acres and another 29,000 acres under management. And so a big part of that has been broad-based philanthropic support. MathWorks helped us tremendously. They're a software company, get over the line on Barnard, but what that's meant is that we've been able to do things at landscape scale and literally work from the tops of the Appalachian Mountains. This is looking back towards the Chairback Mountain and the 100-mile wilderness area. The AT goes across the tops of these mountains, Galpagos and Hay Mountains there. That's Baker Mountain in the middle of the valley. The west branch of the Pleasant River flows through here. All the way down to the main stems of these rivers. This is a section of the middle branch of the Pleasant River flowing through the Pleasant River Headwaters Forest on their way out into Penobscot Bay, into the sea. AMC hasn't really sat on our laurels throughout this time period. Because of that huge turnover in land, there was Maine stood up and did something about it. How many folks have heard about the Land for Maine's Future program? It was passed by the legislature in 1987. It's been a tool that's primarily been used to buy conservation easements to guarantee public access and in many cases keep these landscapes working, whether it's working waterfronts or working forests. And LMF, Maine should be incredibly proud of that. That's been a hugely successful, important tool. And what that's meant is in 1994, Maine led the nation with the number of acres that we had conserved, about 1.1 million acres. We're still doing pretty darn good with a total conserved today about 4.4 million acres as of this year. And you can see it's at a variety of scales, from big conservation easements like the big easement around Moosehead Lake that is keeping that forest working but free from development, to all the smaller parcels that local land trusts have bought right adjacent to where a lot of people live to make sure people have still a place to be able to hunt and then be able to gather firewood and things like that right in the communities where they live. And here we are right in the center of the state. So we were founded as partially a hiking club. So in 2003, we got our trail crews out there and we started building. So since then, we've built 130 miles of trail. We actually have the largest network of groomed cross-country ski trails in New England with 92 miles of cross-country ski trails on the property. And we just have a whole variety of different trails from hiking, snowshoeing, skiing, you name it. We've built 16 remote paddle-to campsites on a lot of the ponds that are free to use. There's 24 drive-to campsites, and we have over 300 miles of gravel biking, which means that folks can come up and ride their bikes on our logging roads, which sounds simple enough for all of us that grew up here, but for people from away to be able to hop on a bike and ride over 300 miles and never see a car or see a building, I mean, this is unbelievable. We started, as I mentioned, our first purchase was Little Lyford. Little Lyford is the longest continually operating sporting camp in the state. It's been around since 1872. It's been in continuous operation. It's older than AMC is, but it's right in the middle of the network. Gorman Chairback was started back in the 1880s as a sporting camp, although the oldest building on the campus is this one, the Octagon, which was built in 1867 by a one-armed Civil War veteran from Brownville, and it's still standing. You can stay in the Octagon right now if you want to. We reopened that in 2010. Metawisla was started as a sporting camp in the 1950s, although there was a long series of logging camps on that site up on Second Roche Pond. That was stick-built in the 1950s and pretty rough by the time we bought it in 2009. Between the mice and the electrical power running through propane tank lines, we figured we'd probably better start over. So we tore that facility down and reopened this one, brand new facility in 2017. And again, we mentioned that night sky. I mean, it's no joke that this truly is the map of the big, large, dark skies left in the United States. And where we are in Maine is really the only place in the Northeast that can boast having the same visibility of the night sky. And so AMC's Maine Woods properties became the first international dark sky park in the East. And so we're very proud of that because that's really a tool for everyone to be able to use in their own marketing to get people to come and understand what this opportunity is. Because it's not a park, we all know that. But if you're from away, you don't really have any concept of a big privately owned landscape like this that has all of the permanently conserved public values that we have. And so the dark sky has been one way to translate that out to folks from away that are looking to come here and understand what it is. So forest management and carbon, forest management has been a really critical part of our work. And you know, we could spend all day talking about forest management, but in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is transition from even age industrial management. So if you think of sort of more normal kind of clear cut and thinning and planting on 30 to 40-year rotations, we're trying to move away from this on our land base to grow longer lived, multi-age species that are higher value. If you remember, we own this as a business, so it's an LLC. So as a manager of that LLC, I'm incentivized by the board to continue to grow the asset. And the best way to grow that asset is to improve the stocking and improve the quality of the stocking. Because that means that the underlying asset value is higher, we can leverage that in different ways. So it's a new way of thinking about the length of an ownership that enables us to find value even in not having to cut those trees in the near term. It gives us more time to let them grow on the stump and cut them later on. So here's what we're shooting for and what we've been practicing for the last 23 years. This is the barren chairback range just south of that, near Indian Pond and T7R9. And we've actually harvested every acre in this photograph. We've harvested in both high elevation areas and then down in the hardwood valleys and the lowlands. And so when you zoom into that picture, you know, there's a couple big pieces of John Deere equipment down there roadside. I mean, you all know those are 25 ton machines, just to give you a sense of scale. What we're trying to do is take these forests that, and many of them have been managed on an even age basis, create gaps, create openings, scarify the forest soil to get another cohort of trees going. We want to have 3 to 4 age classes of trees on every acre so that we can continue to allow the higher quality trees to grow into really high quality saw logs while we're continuing to cut hardwood pulp out of the middle and make space for the future trees to come in. So it's about lighter, constant entries rather than big clear cuts and single entries every 30 years. So it's a lot of work, and it actually takes more people. So that's the other thing about this. And we've got one of our long-standing guys who's been at the heart of all this work for a long time, Billy London's in the room here with us. You know, we actually employ more people through contracting businesses than this land base did when it was industrially managed. So there's about 6 different businesses, Billy's is one of them, that work on the land base. And I think these employment numbers are still accurate, but I think if you add up the numbers of all 6 of those businesses, they employ about 47 people. So when it was industrially managed, there were actually far less people working on this land base because the intervals in which you're doing that work were a lot farther apart. We're grading a lot of roads. We work on about 180 miles of our 500 plus miles of road every year. You just wouldn't do that if your primary business was timber. And so that's another way that we're trying to invest in the infrastructure and keep it open. So how are we doing? How is this forestry experiment working? Well, what you're seeing in these 2 lines is the blue is one of our ecological reserve areas. So we did have some areas of the property that were really ecologically intact, and so we set those aside as areas for no timber harvesting and just kept them open as recreation areas. And so that they were at a higher stocking, so they had more carbon per acre on those plots of land because they had more wood per acre. What you're seeing is the red line are the areas where we've been using forest management as a restoration tool. Those are areas where we're practicing forest management, we're actually cutting trees. And the important thing to see is that the growth rates are parallel. So the amount at which that they're sequestering carbon and adding meat to those trees means that in the untouched stands, our forest management is mimicking the natural accumulation of wood. So that's a good indicator that our experiments, if you will, are succeeding in the ways that we wanted them to. We're accumulating stocking on the landscape. And we've got a whole network of research partners who are helping us figure that out in real time. So what you're seeing on this overly busy map is a wide variety of different academic, state, and federal partners who have research installations monitoring this work and learning about the watershed restoration work and learning about the forest management work, both to help us make better management decisions, but to also get better ecological outcomes out there. So a big focus of ours, and I think one of the truly most incredible things that I've had an opportunity to learn about, because it just was not on my radar growing up here. Many of you will recognize this. This is the Penobscot watershed overlaid on the state of Maine. 5 million acres in size. Massive, it's our biggest watershed in the state, and Maine should be incredibly proud of the Penobscot River and the level that it is. It's historically was home to a huge population of Atlantic salmon. It today is home to really the last the last naturally viable Atlantic salmon population anywhere on the eastern seaboard. But to give you a little bit of a comparison, at one time the Penobscot River probably supported about an annual Atlantic salmon run of about 2 million fish. Today the Penobscot supports an annual salmon run of about 1,100 fish. So massive, significant decrease. Who knows what this is? People are quivering in the audience, but it's brook trout, yes, exactly. Eastern brook trout. So we've got this in spades up here, right? So we're very fortunate. We're in this heartland of eastern brook trout. We should not take for granted the brook trout. Brook trout historically extended all the way down the Appalachian mountain chain all the way into Virginia. Since 1950, brook trout have lost the vast majority of their natural spawning habitat, such that the state of Maine is home to 90% of the remaining eastern brook trout habitat left in the United States. Since 1950. Of what's in Maine, 90% of what is in Maine is in the unorganized territories. The brook trout truly is a canary in the coal mine for things like fish passage issues, warming water temperatures, bad forest management or forest management with disregard to watershed values. So again, this is, while we have it in spades, this is an incredibly important indicator for the health of our forests. And the fact that we have both of these in the Penobscot watershed is really incredible. So when you look at the historic range of Atlantic salmon in Maine, that's what you're seeing beneath you. You're seeing the pink layer on the state is where we believe historically Atlantic salmon utilized inland habitat prior to roads, bridges, dams, things like that. Critical Atlantic salmon habitat, the crosshatched areas, are areas that have both enough elevation, enough snow load, and enough main stem river habitat to provide, in the future, if we can get the fish back there, the best hope in the United States at restoring some semblance of Atlantic salmon populations. And if you see, again, here we are in about 150 river miles inland on the main stem of the Penobscot. So there's been a lot of work in the background. So what you're seeing between these two maps, on the left-hand side, the main stem of the Penobscot River snaking up through Bangor, all the way north up into Baxter State Park, and the north branch, and the south branch of the Penobscot. Here we are, the Maine Woods Initiative in 100 Mile Wilderness. The Penobscot River Restoration Project, which was one of the largest river restoration projects in the United States, pulled two dams, the VZ Dam, the Great Works Dam, and then built a massive bypass structure up here at Howland. And what that did is it enabled for the first time in 180 years the possibility of getting fish back to their spawning habitat. So what you're seeing on this map is all of these areas highlighted in dark blue. These are the areas that potentially could have Atlantic salmon should more barriers be removed. What in actual fact has happened today is that this watershed, the west branch of the Pleasant River and the middle branch of the Pleasant River, are the only major sub-drainages of the Penobscot River that are currently accessible to sea-run fish. So since 2020, when the Howland Dam bypass went in, sea-run fish can now reach in here. And on an annual basis, we now have some of those 1,100 Atlantic salmon going through Silver Lake along the Katahdin Ironworks Road into the west branch of the Pleasant River for the first time since main stem dams were built in the 1830s. And another kind of bizarre, crazy thing, how many folks have been by Silver Lake? Did anybody know where the name Silver Lake came from? I don't know the indigenous name prior to that one. But Silver Lake got its name from the first folks who were up there in the 1840s when those first very permeable main stem dams in the Penobscot were being built. The first one went in 1838. They leaked like sieves, they washed out constantly, fish could still get through. Silver Lake got its name for the alewife runs that used to come all the way north of Brownville in the millions. And the Silver Lake would be loaded with alewives. And so, nobody's seen that in living memory. Today, since 2020, we now have alewife runs in Silver Lake of about 250 to 300,000 fish every year that come back. And that's been incredibly quick. They've been the biggest success story of all of this work. And these watersheds truly are really amazing. And so you can really see the sub-watersheds overlaid on our conservation efforts. We've really been trying to piece together these entire intact watersheds that have never been developed to be able to continue this opportunity with this restoration work. A big part of this has been something as simple as getting rid of road culverts. So many of you, some of you may even in the room have participated in another crazy thing that Maine has in our legacy. We are the home of the last log drive in the United States on the Kennebec in 1976. We were the last place to stop sending wood down rivers. This meant in 1977, you had to get the wood some other way to the mills. So we started building roads, and we did it in earnest. So in 1977, we had around 11,000 miles of privately owned woods road. Today, we have about 45,000 miles of privately owned woods roads. So we've done a great job at roading the state and it's completely switched over our industrial transportation. To put that into perspective, the state only has 19,000 miles of publicly owned tarred road. So we have far more of privately owned logging road than any other type of road infrastructure in the state. And we've put in a lot of road culverts. Well, if you're an eastern brook trout, say nothing of Atlantic salmon, nothing in your day-to-day routine looks like a 90-foot long steel pipe. So this is not something that allows you to get upstream to that super cold, highly oxygenated water up on the hill to be able to spawn. So the quickest way to restore that habitat is to pull this out. Billy London put this bridge in. Just put one in this week. This is up on the Roaches track, Bill, up along on the lower crossover road. So this is the same location. It was a 4-foot diameter pipe. Then we pulled it out, rebuilt the stream bed, and put the bridge in. And you know, as a guy from Willimantic, I'm incredibly proud of how efficient we can put these things in. I mean, these are all off-the-shelf components. Those are Bishop blocks from the concrete plant in Brownville. These are steel from over in Browns Welding in Norwich Walk. The guy that Billy knows welded them up, and the hemlock comes from over in Bradford. I mean, these are things that we can do off the shelf. But the impact on habitat is instantaneous. You know, these fish are there now. And so many of the ecological problems that we're facing, particularly when you think about restoration, you're trying to get a species back to that place. We have this bizarre opportunity in Maine where these fish are still here. So it's better now and far cheaper now to fix these problems while we can, while these fish are still vibrant, so that they can continue to be in these places. The other thing that it does for us is it means the culverts no longer wash out. We have far bigger openings. So with all these increased storm events, we haven't had a washout in probably the last 10 years because we've been really going after